Well, warm greetings from Adyar on behalf of Praga CS Studio to all sisters and brothers that are joining us today from all over the world and from India to celebrate this 7th International Day of Yoga. It is a pleasure and an honor to have Sister Linda Oliveira from the Theosophical Society in Australia as our guest speaker on this special occasion. But before we begin, we have few requests, technical requests to everyone. That is to keep your microphone muted during the talk, please. And if you have any questions, any comment, any query, kindly note them down and ask them at the end of the talk. Or you also can write them in the chat box and we will take them up after the talk. We thank all of you for your cooperation in this sense. Before introducing our guest speaker, we are going to begin our meeting with the universal invocation, indicating the unity in diversity and oneness of life, followed by a few moments of silence. So, I request all of you to sit comfortable and if you feel so, to close your eyes. Oh, hidden light, vibrant in every atom. Oh, hidden light, shining in every creature. Oh, hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May all who feel themselves as one with thee know they are therefore one with every you. So to introduce our today's speaker, we have the presence of our dear and respected Professor Shinde from Adyar. Professor Shinde, over to you.
Good morning to you all, brothers and sisters. At the outset, I thank Sister Catalina and Brother Shikhar for giving me this honor and opportunity to introduce Sister Linda Oliveira, a well-known theosophist. As I know her since 2008, I found her the best integrator with team spirit to take humanity a step forward. She is a second-hand generation theosophist and therefore joined the Theosophical Society in Australia in 1971. That is, this year she is completing 50 years of joining the Theosophical Society. So after hearing talks of J. Krishnamurti, she focused to study psychology and political science for her degree course at the Australian National University. As we know, she has been rendered her service in the Theosophical Society in many capacities, right from a day she joined the Theosophical Society. As we know, as the National President of the Theosophical Society Australian section, for 2 terms she was the National President, and a term before coming to India, and another term after returning back to Australia. So she worked for 2 terms as the National President of the Theosophical Society Australian section. She wrote many articles on the theosophical subjects and also looked after National Magazine as the editor. From October 2008 to 2011, she worked at Adyar International Headquarters as the international vice president, helping our international president, then Radha Bernier, when she had some difficulties, health difficulties, and therefore she was unable to travel. But Sister Linda Oliveira, as vice president, visited many Theosophical Society lodges and federations of India and addressed the international convention and arranged World Congress as well. She holds a strong conviction that a genuine exploration and reflection upon Theosophy provides to those who are awake, and in them there is the possibility of profound human spiritual transformation. I think with these words, I introduce Sister Linda Oliveira to you all, and on behalf of you all who are very eager to listen her on this eve of International Yoga celebration on the topic, the art of Raja Yoga, I once again welcome Sister Linda Oliveira. Most welcome and most warmly welcome to India. And now over to Catalina. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Brother Shindy.
Thank you.
We need to put some slides up, and once that is done, I will be able to commence the talk.
Is it working, Sister Linda?
I am not seeing the option to share the screen at the moment.
On the Zoom window in the center, green option.
In the center.
Down.
I'm not seeing. Oh, now I can see it. Just
Yes.
one moment.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Now we can see the slide full screen. Great.
You can see the full screen of the slide.
Yes.
Very good.
Please.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. We are going to think about art today while considering the subject of Raja Yoga. And I thought it was an interesting way of thinking about our development through yoga. If you think about an artist, anybody who is learning art needs to become familiar with the basic technical aspects of his or her craft before they can thoroughly, completely master their art and before they can be truly creative. Once the basics are understood, once the technical aspects are understood, then the artist can truly create. With so many things in life, including yoga, the same principle applies. Each one of us is an artist, even though we may not always be aware of this, because we are all artists of our own spiritual destiny. our own unfoldment. We create the karmic conditions for our own spiritual future with its inherent creative possibilities. The question is, are we open to actively create the conditions through which our spiritual potential can unfold? If we are seriously searching for life's deeper realities, then we will also be seriously prepared to help activate this search in meaningful ways in our lives. For many, such a search has taken place through the practice of yoga. The term yoga has been applied to many forms of asceticism, meditation, and training practiced by Hindus, Buddhists, or Christians. Yoga is not just confined to India. The universal nature of yoga was brought out by Mrs. Radha Bernier in her Blavatsky lecture to the English section, which is well worth reading. It was called the Universal Yoga Tradition. Mrs. Radha Bernier wrote, "There have been the few in every age and culture who have searched within themselves for the source of light and goodness, not lured by the empty outer forms of religion or by sterile theological speculation. Their quest, in relation to which neither conventional codes of good behavior nor religious dogmas have relevance, found its most lucid expression in the discipline called yoga. The tradition of yoga, contrary to popular belief, is not confined to India, as I mentioned. So it is related to a really universal stream of inquiry and understanding, which comes down the ages in diverse schools, in Egypt, Greece, in Sufi law, in the teaching of the Buddhists and Taoists, in the Christian tradition, in the Tantra and Vedanta. At the heart of the outer teachings, there is a way of life and training appropriate to the inner quest and direction signified by the word yoga. Now, there is much literature available on various types of yoga. Ernest Wood, who was a prominent theosophist, identified 3 categories of individuals in relation to yoga. Firstly, the person who simply takes an interest in yoga. Secondly, the person who has started a deliberate and fairly regular practice of yoga, who is really a novice or beginner. And thirdly, the stage of the yogi, who is expert in the use of meditation and contemplation. We can think of the person who undertakes certain yoga practices as not just a novice, but someone who has commenced the creative process of becoming a yogi. It is also important to stress that this is a creative process. It is a definite and focused creative process. It is not some dreamlike activity. Ernest Wood quoted Swatmarama Swami, who wrote many centuries after Patanjali, "Yoga does not succeed when accompanied by excessive eating, exhausting occupation, too much talking, adherence to painful vows, promiscuous company, and fickleness. It becomes successful by energy, enterprise, perseverance, philosophy, resolution, and solitude. So energy, enterprise or work, and perseverance apply to yoga. They also apply very much to the creative process. And they also require the use of will. The classic yoga of India is, of course, that of Patanjali, who was reputedly the codifier of the yogic tradition, recognized as one of the 6 orthodox darshanas of Indian philosophy. Patanjali's yoga, commonly known as Raja or kingly yoga, is perhaps called that because it is said to embrace 6 yogas: Bhakti yoga, Karma yoga, Mantra yoga, Laya yoga, Hatha yoga, as well as itself. That is Raja yoga. This tradition, Raja yoga, is also known as the yoga of will, the earliest and most scientific treatment of the subject of self-transformation, the attainment of union with the real or the eternal. Wallace Slater observed that it develops through concentration and meditation, tuning the nervous system to be in harmony with higher vibrations. Dr. I.K. Taimni considered the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali to be the most authoritative and useful book on the subject of yoga. So today we are going to consider a few of the fundamentals. But to begin with, what is yoga itself? The word yoga, as you will see on the slide, comes from yuj, the act of yoking, joining, attaching, or harnessing, the union of the individual soul with the universal soul. So there is this strong sense of unity with yoga. Through the practice of yoga, one may therefore come to a transcendental and unifying state of consciousness, becoming one with the divine, with the sense of self completely gone while this state is sustained. Here are 2 definitions of yoga, which are mentioned in a book called The Flower of Yoga by Ianthe Hoskins. First of all, from the Katha Upanishad, when all the senses are stilled, when the mind is at rest, when the intellect wavers not, then say the wise is reached the highest state. This calm of the senses and the mind has been defined as yoga. It is really quite beautiful. And then in the Bhagavad Gita, equilibrium is called yoga. How often do we lose equilibrium during the day, during our daily activities? But to be able to maintain that equilibrium is true yoga. Let us go on now. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, yoga is the inhibition of the modifications of the mind when the seer is established in his own essential and fundamental nature. We will go into this a little bit more afterwards. But Mrs. Radha Bernier made a couple of interesting statements too. She said, essentially, yoga is concerned with the ending of the independent self, the self which speaks with the many voices of thought and desire, which is a very good way of describing the personal nature, the personal self. She also observed that the culmination of yoga is a state of non-duality and natural harmony. So these definitions or comments about yoga bring out a certain understanding of the term. It is unitive and it is very much about subduing the changes in the mind and attaining a state of true harmony. Now, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are mentioned here, but we may then ask, what is a sutra? This word comes from the Sanskrit root siv, to sew, and it's connected with suki and suna, a thread, yarn, string, line, cord, or wire. And in reference to a text such as the Yoga Sutras, the term refers to a short sentence or an aphorism, and any work or manual which consists of strings of such rules which hang together like threads. And an important thing about a sutra also is it is very brief. It condenses philosophical ideas into the bare minimum of words. The thread-like connection between the sutras indicates that they are all related in some way. And in a sense, we need to give these threads more thickness, more body, by learning to understand them more deeply. So we have a fuller understanding than what is conveyed in just the words alone. The thread-like connection between the individual sutras does in fact form an important connection, an important kind of continuity between the sutras. But the student needs to dwell upon them to find out their implications. In the olden days, not only were the sutras committed to memory, but they were also meditated upon very regularly and deeply to help throw light on their hidden meaning. We're now going to take a brief look at the 4 main sections of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Delving into the sutras themselves provides a whole world of study and contemplation for a long time, but we can look at them very, very briefly here. In his book, The Science of Yoga, Dr. Taimni noted that Patanjali's work is divided into the following 4 sections. First of all, Samadhipada. And this is concerned with the general nature of yoga and its technique. It includes subjects such as vairagya, or the absence of attraction towards objects which give pleasure, and also abhyasa, or persistent practice. The second main section is sadhanapada. The philosophy of the kleshas are dealt with here. And this philosophy needs to be very thoroughly understood before one can embark on the path of yoga. It then deals with the first 5 preparatory practices of yoga technique, which are external. They're meant to fit the aspirant physically, mentally, emotionally, and morally for the practice of higher yoga. The third section is Vibhuti-pada, which concerns the 3 remaining practices of yogic technique, which culminate or end in samadhi, and through which powers or siddhis are acquired. The fourth and final section is Kaivalya Pada. This deals with those essential philosophical problems which are involved in the study and practice of yoga. Things like the nature of the mind and mental perception, desire and how it binds us, perhaps much more than we might imagine. Also, liberation and the results which follow from it. In various translations of the Yoga Sutras from the Sanskrit, English equivalents are not exactly perfect. So one's deeper intuition needs to be brought to bear, especially if one does not speak Sanskrit or understand Sanskrit. In the Science of Yoga, Dr. Taimni included commentaries on the sutras in his translation, as well as the meanings of specific Sanskrit words which were used in the sutras, to allow the student to compare interpretations with literal meanings based on facts and the truth underlying the various sutras, rather than getting too concerned with semantics. As he wrote, the serious pursuit of the yogic ideal can be undertaken only on understanding fully the nature of human life and the misery and suffering which are inherent in it, and the further realization that the only way to end this misery and suffering permanently is to find the truth which resides inside ourselves by yogic discipline. So yoga is deep. It is a form of training that needs to be self-chosen and self-imposed. It cannot be imposed on one person by another person. Wallace Slater observed that in yoga, the laws of nature are intelligently and deliberately applied to daily life. The purpose being to realize in full self-consciousness one's identity with the Supreme. Therefore, it is an orderly process and it requires the use of will. Yet, this journey should not be regarded as simply an arduous task, an arduous, difficult journey. After all, it is the individual choice of each practitioner. And furthermore, it is a truly creative process. It is a process of artistry in which we sculpt our consciousness in order to become fitter vessels or receptacles of truth. We are sculptors of our own consciousness. So if we think more in terms of artistry, the process may become a much more inspiring one. And we can notice that an artist who paints includes certain things in the painting, and as a result of that, other things are excluded, other things are left out of the painting. And it's a bit similar with yoga. So let us turn to some of the main teachings of the Yoga Sutras in order to get a little bit of an understanding of the creative task which is before the student of yoga. The task of excluding certain things on the one hand, and the task of creatively working with other things as well. Things that we, if you like, which can be used to enrich our nature. So a brief word, first of all, on the kleshas, which are central to understanding Raja Yoga. Dr. Taimni wrote that klesha means pain, affliction, or misery, but gradually has come to mean the causes of pain, affliction, or misery. These causes are common to all of humanity. We all have these within us. We can see them at work in our lives. In order to undertake the spiritual journey in earnest, it is essential to actually remove these very causes or kleshas. So when we think about the artist excluding something, ultimately certain things, ultimately the practitioner of yoga also needs to exclude, or if you like, completely subdue the kleshas. And there are 5 of these. And you can see them here on this slide. I'm sure they will be well known to just about everybody who is listening to this talk. Avidya or ignorance, asmita or egotism, raga, desire, dvesha, aversion, and abhinavesha, the desire for life or continuity. And it is said that the root cause of all the remaining kleshas is ignorance. Ignorance is our, if you like, our fundamental problem. Perhaps ignorance of who we really are, ignorance about life. So now we're going to look at yoga in a nutshell. And that is in this most fundamental statement in the Yoga Sutras, Yoga Chitti Vritti Nirodha. And this is translated in Dr. Taimni's book as yoga is the inhibition of the modifications of the mind. There are some other interpretations here in this slide also of this particular phrase. George Feuerstein, yoga is the restriction of the fluctuations of consciousness. Dr. Ravi Ravindra, yoga is the quieting of the turnings or projections of the mind. Yoga is for steadiness of attention and also for the settling of the mind into silence. So these are some slightly different ways of looking at this very fundamental yoga statement on yoga of what it really is. Yoga, Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha. So the whole philosophy of yoga and its technique are really compressed into this single sentence. And if we think about it, the mind tends to be frequently in a state of distraction, agitation, restlessness, and so forth, which modify its original tranquil condition. And although we will not go into them here, it can be mentioned briefly that the chitta vrittis are 5 fundamental states or types of modifications in which the mind can exist. They concern right knowledge, wrong knowledge, fancy, sleep, and memory. We can note this in passing. So we can call this yoga in a nutshell. We're going to move on now to the 8 limbs of yoga. The system of Raja Yoga, as set out by Patanjali, has 8 fundamental steps. It is also known as Ashtanga Yoga, Ashta meaning 8 and Anga meaning limb. So 8-limbed yoga. So we're going to have a look at these now. The first 2 concern morality and ethics. which are really a sound basis. They are an essential basis for any serious spiritual pursuit, which otherwise can become a self-centered exercise. We have yama or self-restraint and niyama or self-discipline. We will look at the yamas and the niyamas in a moment. The next three limbs are concerned with discipline of the body and senses, external preparations for yoga, bahiranga, asana or posture, pranayama, control of breath, pratyahara, control of the senses. These are the first 5 limbs of yoga. And if we continue on, we come to the last 3 stages. These are internal stages, antiranga, and cover all aspects of mind control. And they're really the most important aspects of Raja Yoga itself. Dharana or concentration, dhyana or meditation, and samadhi or contemplation. For a very readable and practical guide to Raja Yoga, there is a book called Raja Yoga, a simplified and practical course by Wallace Slater. He was a prominent theosophist a number of decades ago. It was briefly mentioned before. He was a serious student of yoga, and this little book is a concise and clear guide to the practice of yoga, daily practice of Raja Yoga. It's still in print today. Its lessons include behavior, sense restraint, vehicles of consciousness, contemplation, and advice for the future. Practical exercises are given throughout. So this is a slight digression, but it may be of use in some way. Another very good book is, I think it's called Practicing Yoga by Brother S.S. Varma as well, who deals with yama and niyama, which we are going to have a look at now. And I've used this image here of the potter with clay because I think it is a very beautiful image, and it reminds me very much of how we need to shape ourselves, mold ourselves, train ourselves to be in a certain way. So the potter is there with his pot that he is making. So the yamas or restraints include ahimsa, non-violence or non-violation, satya or truthfulness, ashteya, non-stealing, brahmacharya, containment, and aparigraha, non-grasping. These are the restraints, and they are complemented by the observances or niyamas, sauka, purity, samtosa, contentment, tapas, self-discipline or austerity, svadhyaya, study of the sacred scriptures, and ishvara pranidhana, resignation to Ishvara or God. It is not difficult to understand how the yamas and niyamas can be used to actively recreate ourselves, to mold ourselves as the potter molds clay into a new kind of being with very special qualities. This is just part of the art of Raja Yoga. What is required is that we dwell on the meanings of these things. What do they mean to us? What does each of these things mean to us? If we look at the yamas or restraints, for example, how can we apply them in our daily lives? What does that mean? We need to think about this. We can systematically endeavor to put them into practice, chipping off a bit here and there, adding a bit more here and there, just like the potter. until we become more fit vessels to allow the unity of life to flow through us, or into us and through us, just like that potter who is molding the clay into a perfect open vessel. It has been said that the practice of yama and niyama leads to many blessings. They help to open one up to the vastness of life. And in the process, the individual who practices these must also uplift those who are around him or her, because we do influence others simply by who we are. Consider ahimsa, for example. Even some animals will be not aggressive if they are near a person who is completely pure and non-violent. St. Francis of Assisi was one such person. There's an essential difference between the yamas and the niyamas. The yamas are essential moral or prohibitive, while the practices involved in niyama are constructive in nature. So certain things, we are restraining certain things, and on the other hand, we are developing certain things, allowing those other things to flower within us, which is quite beautiful. The yamas help to lay a foundation for us ethically in life, and the niyamas help us to organize our life in a certain way. The yamas are very much concerned with the challenges of life and the world, and they require us to respond to daily life, to the little things in daily life in a certain way. For example, is it possible to go through an entire day and simply be conscious of being non-violent in any of our responses to anyone or to anything? As Dr. Timney pointed out, it would be difficult to practice them as an ascetic living alone, but in the case of the niyamas, these have to be gone through regularly, whatever the circumstance in which one is placed. So that's the yamas and niyamas, just briefly, and we will go on now to asana. Asana relates to posture or control of the body. The essential purpose of asana is to develop a non-interfering body as a basis for higher yogic practices. So the physical body needs to be controlled. We need to be in charge of the physical body, so the physical body is not in charge of us. And the next stage or next limb of yoga is pranayama, the regulation and control of breath. Yama means restraint and pranayama means restraint or control of breathing. In Raja Yoga, the control of breath is limited to harmonizing the breath so that it has a slow and steady pace. So the body's automatic processes continue without any effort of will. The object is to cleanse the blood and feed the nerves to assist in control of the mind, producing inner serenity and calm. Now, breathing is much more than simply filling the lungs with air. According to the occult tradition, when we breathe in, we take in the cosmic breath of the universal spirit. Physically, the nervous system is steadied so that life currents can be in a harmonious state of flow. Mentally, the mind is free from mental disturbances or external disturbances. Control of the mind, control of the thinking principle by the Atma or self then becomes possible. Wallace Slater recommends when breathing in to think of the whole body being filled with this vital health-giving force, and when breathing out to think about the elimination of impurities. We now move on to Pratyahara, control of the senses. Now, what does this mean? It requires restraint of the mind from following the impressions of the senses, and therefore it requires careful observation of oneself. It is important to understand, to become aware of the ways in which the senses dominate us and to watch them at play. Not only is it desirable to consciously withdraw the senses when one is commencing meditation, but as Venerable Samdong Rinpoche mentioned, the necessary calming down is not achieved through meditation, but by living an ordinary, routine life. If we lead a life of moderation, then we're not going to become unduly excited, for example. We are not going to allow the senses to carry us away too much anyway. And now we come to the last three limbs of yoga, which are internal, antiranga, and cover all aspects of mind control. And these are really the most important aspects of Raja Yoga. Together they make up what is known as samyama. So dharana, or concentration, first of all, requires the mind to hold to a single thing or item at will, whether this is a physical object or an idea or a revered spiritual figure, to give some examples. It requires one to free the mind from habitual association with desire and feelings, and then to focus quietly on a single thing to the exclusion of everything else. Therefore, the will comes into play here. The will, in a sense, deletes whatever is not necessary at that moment. And a real aid when concentration wanders is always going back to the breath, just breathing very steadily in and out. Not controlling the breath, just allowing the breath to move very naturally. The next limb of Raja Yoga is dhyana, or meditation. And this is a very beautiful aspect of the yoga tradition. It begins when active thought ceases or stops, and when we become aware of the inner meaning of the object of meditation. In meditation, thought is brought to rest quietly on a concept that has many overtones. It has subtleties. Nothing is experienced except for the one concept at that moment, with all of its richness. It is a complete flow of thought about an object of concentration. It is a flow into the object of concentration, not past it. You enfold yourself in a cocoon of your own thoughts. It has been said that you go in a grub, like a little caterpillar or something, and come out a butterfly. So the meditation can be thought of as becoming a butterfly. Concentration focuses the direction of our thoughts. That is clear enough. Meditation focuses the direction of our lives. It is said, what we think on, we become. What we meditate on, we become. If we meditate on things which are very beautiful and uplifting, then that is what we become. Meditation, the whole process of meditation is a very powerful and amazing tool in our own spiritual unfoldment. And lastly, we come to samadhi or contemplation. Here the meditator becomes completely one with the object of meditation. So there's an expansion of consciousness that lifts one out of the little self into the greater self. It is a wordless state. Thought ceases. It is practically beyond verbal description. There is only one reality, pure oneness, pure union. So in closing, it can be seen from this overview of Raja Yoga that it involves dedication, skill, and an exceptional degree of patience in order to craft ourselves from a more ordinary person who is controlled very much by the senses and drawn mainly to the material world, into an individual who is extraordinary. That is, into one who is content, deeply harmonious, deeply peaceful, utterly unselfish, with these very, very deep reserves of calm. An extraordinary being who is united with all of life and who exists only to serve. It is very clear that the mind is central in this creative process. But if it seems a little difficult to imagine ourselves in this way, then let us use as our inspiration the example of any of the great sages who have incarnated throughout the ages and actively mold ourselves bit by bit, just like a potter molds clay into something ever more beautiful, more refined, and more perfect, a fitting reflection of the marvelous universal creation of which we are each a unique expression.
Thank you, Sister Linda ji, for sharing with us the real meaning and essence of Raj Yoga, as mentioned in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, and its implementation in daily life. We are sure that many of our delegates who are present here may be having some queries or questions regarding this subject, as these days only some physical exercises and breathing exercises have become synonymous with yoga, and you have given a much deep and real meaning of Raj Yoga. So we have about 15 minutes in which we'll be taking up some questions. So if any delegate or any of our guests have any questions, please, you can type in the chat box and we will be taking up your questions. And to begin with, we have received a couple of questions through YouTube and WhatsApp. So Sister Linda, this question is that you used the word in the beginning of the talk, if we do serious preparation, does it have the same implication as understanding the urgency of yoga?
Perhaps a serious understanding refers to a sense of what is really important in life. You know, we get very caught up in the world and all the things that are happening and all the news that comes into our television and onto our smart devices and all of that. But really, there is a serious dimension to life. I think for anyone who has even had a brief glimpse of a state of relative unity, if you like, or just a brief glimpse of unity, then that is something which draws one onwards. And maybe if that pull is strong enough, then an urgency comes about. But I think that urgency will only be there when a person comes to realize the futility of living a shallow life, perhaps finding fault with others, perhaps being aggressive and all those sorts of things, and understands that there must be a better way to live, but not so much for oneself as for the world around one. And I think that the advanced practitioner of yoga more and more lives to serve life. It is not a self-serving enterprise.
Thank you, Sister Linda, so much for that. And we'll take one more question from YouTube, and then we will come to Brother Pradeep Reddy. This question is that there are different classifications of yoga, as you mentioned in the talk. Can we at all segregate it as different ones, or yoga is a sum total of all the classifications? This is from Brother Balaji. And similar question, another question that can be merged, which we have received is Raj Yoga a synthesis of different kinds of yoga, like yoga of devotion, yoga of knowledge, and yoga of action?
Yes, as I mentioned before, Raja Yoga is a synthesis of about 6 different types of yoga. Of course, in today's world, there are all sorts of yoga. If you look up the term yoga on the internet, you will find all sorts of, I think, very superficial ideas or labels for types of yoga. And one has to be a little bit careful here. I think Raja Yoga synthesizes the best in the main streams of yoga, if I can put it that way. I would not say, for example, that Raja Yoga also incorporates laughter yoga, which is one of the fashionable types of yoga today. Yes, it is synthesizing in the very best sense, Raja Yoga, yes.
Okay, thank you. Brother Pradeep Reddy, you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Well, my question is about the 3 limbs of Raja Yoga, that is Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. I often see these 3 limbs or these 3 types. I don't know whether there are 3 types, but these 3 aspects being mixed up, where some teach dhyana as a way of dharana, that is concentrating on one thing itself is dhyana, or some teach that you enter samadhi while doing meditation, that is dhyana. So I always see these 3 things being mixed up. So even though they have different meaning, so I would like to ask Ms. Linda Oliveira to comment more whether they are in series or they are like step-by-step process, or it's like one and the same and can also be mixed together. I don't know about that. Yes.
I think that in the process of meditation, there is a gradual deepening of consciousness. It begins with concentration on a single thing, a single subject. As one goes more deeply into it, there is a different kind of flow, mental flow involved, so that there's a sense in which one is flowing into the object and there is a flow back from the object as well. There's this deepening relationship with the object. So it's a further deeper stage. And samadhi occurs when thought ceases and one is lifted completely out of this sense of self into a state of union. So I see them as, in a sense, sequential, but for an experienced meditator, it is possible to perhaps sit and very quickly go into a deep state of meditation. So the distinction between the three is not so drawn out and not so, if you like, so definite, because that individual is so used to using the mind in a certain way that they can go to a deep state relatively easily.
Thank you, Sister Linda. Brother Pradeep, hopefully you have got your answer from that. And in continuation with that, I think we have received a question in the chat that in meditation, in real meditation, is there the meditator, the process of meditating and the object of meditation, or there is no one?
In meditation, in the sense that I have used the word with dhyana, there is still a sense of self and what is being meditated on. It's just that one is in a deeper state of connection, but there is still a sense of self. It is only when one goes beyond that state of meditation into samadhi that the sense of self actually ceases.
Okay, so same dharana, dhyan, and samadhi. So concentration, and then meditation is, and then during contemplation or samadhi, the subject, object, and the process becomes one. And this brings another one, that is this a state, or is the attainment of state of yoga same as human regeneration that Dr. Radha Bernier has talked about so often?
I think there is a similarity. I think a regenerate human being can move into a state of union fairly easily. But that regenerate human being also can function in the world, but as a much purer individual, a very awake, a very aware individual in the world as well. So I think union is possible for the regenerate human being, but you know, the adepts themselves have said they do not always function at that level. At other times, those who have a personal incarnation also function as, if you like, everyday human beings. And I think also with a regenerate human being who is living and functioning in the world, it is the same kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. And time is almost running out for us. And just one last question before closing this question and answer session. We have received that what is the opinion of HPB on Raj Yoga?
What is the opinion of it?
The way she interpreted the Raj Yoga, I guess the person has asked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, brother N.C. Krishna, yeah, has asked. Yeah.
Well, there's a little book, Practical Occultism. I would recommend that somebody has a look at that book, and it is tough. It is not easy. But I think that her understanding of Raja Yoga is very much represented in that book itself. It's not an easy one. There are practical suggestions for daily life there, and they cause one to really look at oneself very much, and especially to be able to look at one's weak points. You know, there's a lot of self-awareness and attention, I think, in the way in which she treats Raja Yoga as well.
Okay, thank you, Sister Linda. If there are any more questions, if somebody want to ask, we have a couple of minutes. Otherwise, we will proceed with our closing session. Professor Shinde ji, you want to say something?
No, I will thank you, Sister Linda ji. Very much enlightening talk and very deep explanation. Thank you very much for your exposition of this Raj Yoga in the eve of International Yoga Day. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Linda ji. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Yeah, we will be keeping the session open in the end for everyone to convey their best wishes to Sister Linda. And now I think since no more questions, so we will proceed with our closing session. And first of all, we have come to the end of today's session, but definitely not to the end of the journey that all of us are undertaking, consciously or unconsciously. And may the spark of inquiry and the sense of enthusiasm that Sister Linda's words have generated in all of us help us in taking the next step, and more importantly, the direction. So on behalf of Pragya CS Studio, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Sister Linda Oliveira ji, who have taken time from her busy schedule, not to mention on a very short notice. We are especially thankful to her to share her thoughts on this engaging and inspiring subject with all of us, especially on this occasion of the eve of International Yoga Day. We are sure after your wonderful insights, many of us are motivated to pursue their study on this subject. We are thankful to Professor C.A. Shinde, who very happily accepted our request to introduce Sister Linda ji. And a big thanks to all the participants from all over India and around the world who made this session very vital and engaging with their questions and inputs. And with the love and support of all our benefactors, supporters, and subscribers, we continue to make sincere efforts to bring to you Theosophy in simple manner. If you want to watch this talk again or other talks on theosophical subjects, you may kindly visit the YouTube channel, Pragya CS Studio. If you like it, feel free to share and subscribe. And now for closing this memorable morning, afternoon, or evening, depending wherever you are. Okay, before doing the closing prayer, just one announcement that in continuation with celebrating the International Day of Yoga, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, Indian time, 5 p.m., 11:30 a.m. GMT, we are having another talk by Sister Swati Reddy from Bangalore, India. And the title is Yoga, a Holistic Approach to Daily Life. This is Madras Theosophical Federation and Pragya CS Studio joint organization. So all of you are most welcome to attend that too. And now we invite you to close your eyes and make a prayer with all our willpower and concern for the welfare of all beings, especially during the present global situation. May all become happy. May none fall ill. May all see auspiciousness everywhere. May none ever feel sorrow. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you once again, everyone. We'll now leave the mic open if anybody wants to convey their good wishes. And to Sister Linda, please, you can unmute yourself.